Hello and welcome back to another Maya tutorial. This time we're looking at combining and merging different objects of different shapes and sizes together. Specifically, a square object to a round object. Now this is something I get asked quite a lot. Hopefully you've seen my previous tutorial on merging and combining two cylinders together. Now this time we have to think ahead about how many divisions we have on the two different objects. A cube by default has just 4 edges on the bottom, whereas a cylinder has 20. So we're going to start with the cube. Now, before we scale it or resize it or anything, we need to adjust the divisions. We need more than 4 because you can't make a cylinder with 4 edges. So I'm going to go ahead and give this extra divisions by going to the channel box. Under Inputs, click on Polycube 1 or whatever the object's name is, and we can increase the width to 2 and the depth to 2. So we have an additional division vertically on the front, back and the 2 sides. We can go ahead and delete the faces from the bottom, so right click, go to face mode, select the first, shift select the other faces and then backspace to delete those. So we now have a completely hollow cube. We now need to add some more divisions on this, because if we try smoothing it, if I right click and go back to object mode, press 3 to smooth it, it distorts a lot. And we want to maintain these sharp edges before we smooth that. So we can go up to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, and if you haven't used this tool before, I want to put a division vertically along one of these edges on the corner, over the top and then down the other side. And I'm going to click and hold the mouse button on one of these horizontal edges on the top, and we can just drag this loop. You can see the dotted line going around the object, and then release the mouse where you want it. If you go right to the edge, it will disappear. We need to leave a small gap. And you can see that's gone right the way around, except for the bottom, because there's no face on the bottom. We've already deleted those. We can do the same on the other side. Click, hold the button in, and release the mouse button where you want that division. And the same on the remaining 2 sides. So click, drag, hold the mouse button in, then release it where you want it. And we'll also put one from one of these vertical edges near the top. And if I right click, go back to object mode, select tool and select the object. Try smoothing it now, press 3, and that's actually maintained the sharp edges. If you want to see this without the wireframe, go to shading below your shelf, and the default is actually having this off. I turn it on because I find it easier to see what's going on, but if you untick wireframe on shaded, you can now see it has slightly smoothed but sharp edges, and we need to be able to smooth this, so when we actually smooth the whole lot together, the cylinder stays nice and round. I'll just unsmooth that, so press 1 to unsmooth it, and I'll turn my wireframe on shaded back on, so go to shading and wireframe on shaded. We now need to add one more division near the bottom, and you'll see why soon, because we really want a lot of these edges to be a bit more evenly spaced. Now if we go in a bit closer to the corner, if I right click and go to vertex, you can see some of these aren't really evenly spaced, and it's not going to work that well going into a round object. So I'll go back to object mode, I'll go back to my edge loop tool, so Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, and I'll add one more, not too close to the bottom, about 1/3 of the way up. I'll go back to the select tool to turn the edge loop tool off, and I'm going to delete this short vertical edge at the bottom, and I'm going to do that on all 4 sides. So hold shift and select the remaining 3, and then we can just backspace to delete those. Now when we do that, you can see the bottom here still has 2 separate edges, and if we right click and go to vertex, there's a vertice on here as well. We need to delete those ones off. So rotate around, hold shift and select the remaining 3. And then we can just backspace to delete those. Now what we need to do is select the 2 vertices here, not the ones on the very edge, but the ones slightly inside from the new divisions that we put in. So just select these 2. You can use your poly count at the top to make sure you have 2. If you're not sure how to turn the poly count on, it's in display, heads up display, poly count. And with these 2 selected, we can merge them. So edit mesh, merge, and it will bring them into the middle. Do the same on the other 3 sides. So select 2, edit mesh, merge. Select the first, shift, select the second, edit mesh, and merge. And on the last side, edit mesh, and merge. Now, you have quite an unusual pattern here, but if we look closely, every face still has 4 edges. So every face is still a quad. Even this one in the middle here that looks like a large triangle, we have 1, 2, 3, and then 4. This top one is actually split into 2, so it's still a quad. And ideally you want everything to be quads. Now we can right click, go into edge mode, and we need to count how many edges we have going around. So we've got, I'm going to select these all the way around, we've got 2, 3, 4, 6, 8. And we need to make sure the cylinder also has 8. So I'll go back to object mode, I'll select the cylinder, and we can now adjust the number of divisions on the cylinder. So go back to your channel box, under inputs, polycylinder 1, click on that, change your divisions from 20 down to 8. This is where it's important that we can smooth this later on because it's no longer perfectly round. We can delete the faces off the top. So right click, face mode, and I'll select the first and I'll shift select all the way around and delete those. And I'll also delete the ones off the bottom because I can show you a nice trick for filling in the bottom later on. So I'll hold shift, select the bottom ones and backspace to delete those. Now we can actually combine these 2 objects. So I'll go back to object mode and I'll select both of those. Hold shift to select more than one. Mesh, combine. And like we did in the previous tutorial, we can retitle this object if we want to. I'll just call this pipe 1 because it is going to be part of a pipe. And we can delete the history to lose these 2 groups. So go to edit, delete all by type, history. And we now need to be able to connect these together. So I need to extrude a new part out of this bottom half, out of the cylinder. So select your object and go into edge mode, right click edge mode, and you can either select one edge, shift and then select the others, or just double click and it should select all of those. We'll use the extrude tool from the shelf, click on the global button and extrude that up. There is a separate tutorial on extruding if you're unsure how to use this. Now we can right click, go to vertex mode. I'll go back to the select tool just to turn extrude off. And we can go to mesh tools and then target weld. And with that we can start merging these together. So I can actually drag one vertex onto another. So I can start in the middle here and drag that up and then work my way around. And we have 8 edges around the top because we actually manipulated that object earlier with additional divisions. So it should line up perfectly. And you can see I'm modelling in the middle of the grid. So everything does line up absolutely perfectly. We can have a quick look around and you can see the very top is square, the very bottom is round. right click, go back to object mode, go to the select tool and select your object, and now try smoothing it. Press 3, and if I turn wireframe on shaded off, go back to shading under the shelf, untick wireframe on shaded, and deselect your object, you can see it's perfectly square at the top, and it gradually smooths out and goes completely round. And that can be really useful for a number of things. The final thing I want to show you is at the bottom of this round object. If you did delete the bottom part off and you want to fill that in, here's what we can do. Press 1 to unsmooth it, right click, go to edge mode, select all of your edges by double clicking on one of them, and I'm just going to rotate this round the other way up so we can see a bit better. And I'm going to go to the extrude tool, and with that on a local extrude, you can see this blue arrow here is actually pointing into the middle. I'm going to move that in. Alternatively, you could go to your scale tool and scale the whole lot in. And with these currently selected, we have the edges selected. It also works in vertex mode as well if you selected all of these vertices. We can go edit mesh, merge to center, and that merges those into the middle. Okay, that works with any number of divisions. And we finally need to add one more division in the bottom from mesh tools, edge loop tool, and we're going to click and drag one at the very bottom there, just to keep the bottom part sharp. Right click, go back to object mode, select tool and select your object, and then press 3 to smooth that. Okay, so practice it. You need to think ahead about how many divisions you have, and make sure you use the middle of the grid to your advantage to make sure your objects do line up.